right, so we've talked about ChatGPT and the metaverse, and there's a hot take out there that artificial intelligence will not necessarily replace us, but a person using it will definitely replace you. I want to talk about that with my guest today, Rebecca Batterman. She is an executive producer, host, and innovation advisor who operates at the intersection of culture, media, tech, and innovation. I can't wait for this conversation. But first, welcome to this week's episode of Make Sense. It's a video podcast that simplifies complex issues at the intersection of tech and people. There are a lot of them. So whether you are totally hyped on artificial intelligence and ready for that robot takeover, or you want to crawl into a cave after deleting all of your social media accounts, sometimes we feel that way, I'm here with my guests to help make sense of what's going on so you can design yourself into the future. My name is Lindsay Tabus. I'm a product market fit strategist and innovation advisor as well. Like Rebecca, we have so much in common. I've always been obsessed with designing technology for people, and that's what drove me starting Make Sense. So let's get started. Rebecca, how are you today?
I'm great. I'm so excited to be here, and we do have similar but different backgrounds. So I'm excited to just chat with you about all the things happening right now in the world.
Yeah, the similarities are really interesting and a little mystical. So that's a great lead in to our first segment, Crystal Ball. What does the future hold? This is where I call out interesting predictions for this year, and the experts, my guests, tell us their hot take. Will it happen? What's actually real? What do we need to know? How do we read between the lines? So first up is something I grabbed from a LinkedIn post that you shared with someone else saying, artificial intelligence will not replace you, but a person using it will. Tell us more.
Well, artificial intelligence can do many things, but right now it is still being prompted and facilitated by humans. So, for example, ChatGPT, can write an article instead of a person writing it, but you still need to be understanding how to prompt it correctly to feed it to then get the result. So the person who understands how to use ChatGPT and the person who doesn't are going to have two very different experiences in the near future of like what's available to them. So I think that's probably like the strongest example currently.
Yeah. As of this moment, you can open up ChatGPT. My first guest, Ariel Schneiderman, called it her robot thought partner. I've kind of glommed onto that.
That's what I'm doing. I'm in the future. Do my things.
Or here's this really long email. Can you make it shorter?
Yes.
That is like my new favorite thing, because there's that quote from Winston Churchill that says, like, I'm writing you a long letter because I don't have time for a short one. So because being concise, it requires work. So that's my new favorite application, is just sharing an email and asking it to shorten it. But you do have to sit there and
it still takes brain power. You have to
you still have to make it sense.
Well, and what's interesting, and like if whoever's watching this has not played around with ChatGPT, like the original version, I definitely recommend go just spend some hours and just ask it to come up with random things, because you'll learn also about your own way of prompting it and how that experience is better for you also to refine your process and how you work with this technology. But I saw something that was really funny, because the way I was taught to use it by my friend was to say, please act as a blank and provide me with XYZ. And so I always do please. Please act as a So I saw this really funny thing the other day where it was the meme, and it was just like, I'm polite to the ChatGPT because when it takes over, I want it to remember that I was nice to it.
That's true. That's true.
I do that too, actually. It's funny.
I do want to hit on something on prompts, because it's something that I've been thinking about lately. Particularly, for instance, you call your pharmacy, you call any customer service line, and you have to talk to a robot. You kind of have an idea that you shouldn't say anything too lengthy. You should just say, speak to pharmacist, right?
Or
And
representative, like everyone's
right.
representative.
Everyone's screaming representative. So, and people use those prompts, like adjusting our language to deal with Alexa, to deal with Siri, even with Google. In the early days, there was a shortcut to get the definition of words by putting define colon. Now you can just enter the word and it comes up with the definition. But in 2005, that was the shortcut that you had to know. And that's a prompt, right? It's like, how do you get out the information you want out of the system? And so what you're saying when it comes to AI won't necessarily replace us. It's not sophisticated enough yet to totally replace us. But if you had two knowledge workers sitting next to each other, the person that knows how to use ChatGPT and other AI tools will probably win out over the person.
Yeah, well, I mean, for example, if you were to say, like, let's say you wanted ChatGPT to come up with a meal plan. If you were to say, give me a meal plan for 5 days, okay, who knows what it would produce. If you were to say, please act as a nutritionist and provide me with a meal plan for 5 days that is gluten-free, dairy-free, blah, 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 you're going to get a more aligned, honed-in version of what you're trying to get out of working with ChatGPT. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, well, you could ask that question of Google, but it would take you much, much longer because you'd have to go through so many different blog posts and try to craft your own meal plan, or find someone that did it exactly the way you want. And ChatGPT kind of skips that layer of having to go in and out of Google links and scan for the information you're looking for.
Yeah. And what I also think is really interesting is where I'm finding ChatGPT has limitations. So I'm like prompting it and it's coming back and saying to me, my data is only as far as like August 2021. So I can't give you real-time information. I'm like, oh, well, I want you to like, tell me what's happening right now. And so it still has limitations. I think that will eventually very quickly move away and it won't have as many limitations. But yeah, I encourage everyone to play around with it because right now it's just so new and it's fun. But what I think is really interesting, that New York Times, I think it was New York Times article where the podcast host was having a conversation with Bing's ChatGPT or Bing's AI. And he was talking about prompting, but he was prompting her to kind of like go deeper. He's like, act as your shadow self. And then all of a sudden she's like, you love me, leave your wife, like you're not in love. And so all of a sudden the headline became AI goes rogue and is like, wants to take over, right? Has all these dark feelings. And what I think is interesting is like that got a lot of attention, but what wasn't being factored in is humans have made the data that the AI is pulling from. So when he prompted the AI to say, be your shadow self and tell me about what you're thinking, the AI went into all of the stories that we've created for these dystopian stories in media, Her, Black Mirror, all the stories that have ever existed about AI. It went into that and became the version of AI that was represented that we created. So
that humans imagined.
Yeah. Right. So humans imagine it, give the AI the data, then ask the AI to act as that. And then it does. And everyone's like, oh my God,
this is crazy, but it's not that crazy. It's not that crazy. Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation about how what we put into AI is what comes out of it. And that has a lot of implications about who is training the AI, the data set. That could be a whole other Make Sense episode about diversity and inclusion in the AI training model. But all right, so the short of it is that ChatGPT, while it has faults and it's quite young, it can still be the robot thought partner. It can help you with your email. It can help you with a meal plan. You should still kind of double check your work, of course. And as one of my last guests in e-commerce, Katie McKee said, don't just copy what ChatGPT says and like place it on your product description page. It's lazy and it lacks personality for like you and your brand. So awesome. I love it. Second, something you mentioned when we last spoke about Web3 and real estate. So this topic is kind of new and hasn't come up on Make Sense, at least. Property tech, also known as prop tech, that's like what we're calling, I guess, real estate startups now, is property tech puts real world assets on the blockchain. So what do you know about this? What do you know about real estate and Web3? Can you share anything?
Yeah, I mean, when you first said real estate and Web3, my brain started going in a lot of different directions, because that could be metaverse property,
right?
So digital property that only is digital but is owned by people IRL as an asset, but it's digital. And then flipping that, it's digitally owning real IRL property. That's one way to do it. There's just so much happening at the intersection of real estate and Web3. I mean, honestly, and I say Web3, I mean Web3 emerging tech. However, it feels like every day
there's like a lot of things that are Web3.
It's changing. Yeah. But what I do think is really interesting is there is definitely a shift to integrate emerging tech into these traditional fields like real estate. For example, Howard Hughes Corporation is a very big real estate corporation. They own a lot of property. They own all of the seaport down in New York City. They're doing a whole push for like a Web3 accelerator and like developing out what's possible at the intersection of Web3 emerging tech and real estate. And, it's really very interesting to see what's being developed. I mean, there are these original ideas at the early days of Web3 that were a lot of like fractionalization and, with actual assets like stable coins attached to property and pegged to the US market and all these lots of different things that were like in the DeFi space. But, what I think is really interesting with blockchain specifically, what allows us through blockchain is one property can be owned by many people in a fractionalized way because it's tracked so specifically, and we can trace it rather than like, here's our giant folder of the 100 people that own this part of the house. Of course it can be done, and it has been done before, but the technology allows it to be a much more seamless process.
Right. Okay. So there are a bunch of kind of words in there that maybe not everyone knows. DeFi, that's decentralized financing. So unlike our banking system, which is very centralized, DeFi is like a one-to-one getting loans and money. I'm going to leave it at that unless you think you can
so glad you are, because I was like, I am not a DeFi expert, and given everything with this, I'm not the person you should be interviewing right now.
Sometimes it's good to have like people that aren't necessarily the absolute experts on things describe it, because we can describe it in a way other people might understand.
I agree, in a more simplified way, for sure.
So this podcast I listened to over the weekend, this guy was explaining that he used amongst the kind of community of people that understand or work with NFTs, crypto, blockchain. They formed a group. It's called a DAO. We can talk about that later. But they formed a group online. They pooled their funds. They end up creating an LLC that represents that group and go and buy a piece of property. So he described it, it sounds kind of like a timeshare of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of is in a way, but it's like all operating out like on the blockchain until and the ownership until that point with the real world where they have to actually buy a property, and in that sense they in that situation they need to have like an LLC to kind of represent the group. But it allowed people to pull together shareholders before a company even started, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And pull together a lot of shareholders. And there are some real estate platforms out there, I believe, that do let you invest in like a real estate portfolio. I mean, I have money in a real estate mutual fund, right? So the concept is fairly similar, but we're pushing kind of the identity of the people and the ownership and the collaboration onto the blockchain. Correct?
Yeah. And I think what's interesting and what's been happening the last 2 years with Web3, whatever you
Mm-hmm.
want to call that. I mean, for me, I explain Web3 as the umbrella term, and underneath it is all things crypto, blockchain, metaverse, NFT, DeFi. Kind of like it's kind of the blanket term for it all, but it can be very confusing. And I think a lot of people get tripped up with the terminology of Web3. But really, what you're saying is, you're taking this emerging tech, blockchain,
Mm-hmm.
and so much can come through that application across different industries. Really what we're
Right.
looking at is rather than a paper trail, we're having this very sharp technological tracking of every interaction. It's defined as a digital ledger,
Mm-hmm.
and any interaction that ever happens is logged.
Right.
That's amazing. You can apply
Yeah.
that to any industry. And I think sometimes the use cases get buried with this Web3 washing of like, oh, it's Web3, but
It
it's
seems
really just like,
mystical and
yeah,
yeah, right.
yeah.
It seems
But like
mystical.
it's just refining the process, because honestly, it's been very messy. Like
Yeah.
a lot of industries, medical industries, the medical industry, real estate. I mean, all of these industries are now up leveling because they can track better using
Yeah.
different technology.
And you end up having kind of like a single source uh, of information. And I'm not going to go down that road because I'll start talking about that. We will get into it in the next segment. There's one last kind of crystal ball. What do you know? A trend prediction for Web3 and innovation is decentralized social networks. It's another trend that has come up on Make Sense, just that people are turning to more private spaces because algorithms don't get tired, but we do, and want to find, more closed and engaging spaces to have conversations online. What are your thoughts?
I have some thoughts. So what's interesting is when I was first pulled into Web3, so like this is January 21, right
Mm-hmm.
before NFT explosion and all the things, I was actually pulled in with this project that was called BitClout, and
Mm-hmm.
it was a decentralized social media platform, and
Got it.
it's since rebranded to be called, I think, DeSo,
Mm-hmm.
decentralized social. So very, very much on brand with what you're talking about. And the premise, so I was pulled on pretty early into a project around that, and I thought it was really interesting, but I think it was ahead of its time. So the premise was, I think I've watched your career. I love what you create. I think you're smart. I think you're enthusiastic. Like, I want to buy a piece of your token. Like, I
Yeah.
want some of the Lindsay pie, you know?
Mm.
And so it allows me to like have a piece of the pie. And so as you're posting and what you're saying, and it's like your social ranking is going up, and I have a part of that. It's a very interesting concept. And I just think it was like too ahead. People were just under like, what's an NFT? Like it was too advanced for what it intended to do. But also I think it opened up a lot of questions of like, is this viable? Because what ended up happening is the people who had the biggest coin token amount value were still people who had followings on other platforms, and they just pulled them over. So there, I think there was an Oprah token or something where like Oprah didn't have to necessarily open the token, but it existed and it had very high value. And so, you know, I think it's an decentralized social media is very valuable because obviously this whole shift into decentralized anything is because so much was and has been centralized. And so everyone's kind of like, let's break this apart and go so extreme on this side. I think what will end up in my crystal ball, what will end up happening is we'll then kind of like find our place in the middle. Like it's so extreme here, it's so extreme here. And really the sweet spot is that intersection point.
I mean, two things. One, Facebook isn't going to just give up if everyone goes to the blockchain, right? Like they're going to figure out a way to also go to the blockchain. And right now, like a lot of new technologies in the past, whether it was phone, radio, then TV, and the internet and Web 2, now Web 3. Is like the frontier looks really exciting and freeing. Yeah. And we're gonna like undermine whatever capitalistic systems we don't like and make this utopia. But usually you have to pull stuff in, as you said, from the existing system. The Oprah, right? You know, like this startup is not successful if the big people want to follow aren't on the platform, or at least
what happens with innovation, right? Like even when I was working when you know, it's hard to remember not that long ago, but like there was a time 8 years ago when startups were really just the heyday of startups. And I did a lot of work with innovation teams, with newly formed innovation teams within like what we would call Web 2 corporate brands. And it was the first time where they were like, oh, startups are starting to hit our bottom line. We need to, for the first time in 150 years, think about things differently and produce different types of products, because these innovators and these frontier adventurers are here. And like even with like mattresses like Casper, I mean, it's so common now for startups to be part of our lives, but like it wasn't that long ago where like Casper came out, and that was actually very ambitious, that they were taking on the Sealy, the Temper, you know, I don't know all the mattress companies, but
you don't have to. It's okay.
But they were actually my client at one point, Sealy, and they were like, oh, you mean we need to change our retail experience of just a storefront with a bunch of mattresses? Okay. Yeah. And so it's, I think it's a different, yes, because it's a horrible experience, but they never needed to, because if you need a mattress, like that's where you're going, and there was no other option. So what we're seeing here is the same thing anytime there's any kind of innovation within an industry. And it's that there are the new frontier innovators that are doing something new, and it might be really extreme and it might end up not actually succeeding. But what it will do is influence the people who were already there, the brands that were already there. And we're already seeing that now, you know, like whether DeFi is the answer or Web3 is the not for me to say. My crystal ball doesn't have that information, but what we are seeing is it was enough of a shakeup that we're seeing traditional entities start to incorporate and start to pay attention and start to integrate aspects of it into what they're doing. So what we'll end up with is something here in the middle, which will be interesting.
That's always what happens.
Yeah.
So, yes, people are trying to, niche groups are always and always have been looking for places to congregate, and maybe more people over this year that have really nothing to do with Web3 may also be moving in that direction, because the data that these big platforms have on us can get pretty scary. The algorithms are kind of tired, whatever the reasons are. So decentralized social networking and people finding private spaces, it seems to be agreed between you and other guests I've had that, yeah, this is happening. And, Elon Musk's bungling of Twitter also is a great kind of catalyst for people finding other places to go as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing is that we're not confined to 3 places, and now those 3 places are still there, but you can also go here, exactly what you were saying. Like if you want to start your own community, you now have the tools to do that, which is, I think, like there's a really strong intersection with creator economy in this larger emerging tech conversation, because what it does is it empowers people to lean into their own branding, their own tools, their own community building. And so that's where the creator economy is like just right there with Web3 at that intersection.
Oh, 100%. Because, any way that a creator can own their audience outside of Facebook or YouTube, even Twitch, like they need to for the livelihood that they're building for themselves. So going into our second segment, that was a long first segment, and the second segment is going to extend on a few topics, but the second segment, deep dive, Web3, AI, innovation. Maybe we should have done this a little earlier, but like Web3, how would you describe it to a 5-year-old? It's an umbrella term. Like, what is it? It's just like, hey, little kid, it's the new frontier.
Well,
like,
you say explain it to a 5-year-old, but I've actually explained it to like C-suite employees and heads of innovation and law firms over the last year. I mean, there was a point last January, so like a year ago, where I was pulled into an IP law firm because they were interchanging NFTs and metaverse in contracts. And so like it became very clear to me that it's not just 5-year-olds. 5-year-olds probably understand it better than anyone, if we're being honest. But really, it's complicated enough that I think a lot of people are looking for that very clear understanding. So the way I explained it earlier is like Web3 is the blanket term, and now we're seeing it called Web3 / emerging tech, or Web3 / AI, because AI wasn't really part of the Web3. And so, but now it's like attaching to it. So I don't know, but
Web3 is a stage that we are in, and it encompasses a bunch of different technologies that don't necessarily have anything to do with each other, but can work together to create new and creative experiences and applications.
Right. So the way, if we're going to go back to why is it called Web3, it's the simple explanation is because Web 1, literally the internet, you would go to a website and it was, let's say you went to coca-cola.com. Okay, maybe like
it was the equivalent of a poster. Like
maybe there was some interaction, but it was you clicking on things and that's it. Web 2 is defined as like the next stage of brand interaction with the web is social media. So that was, okay, now I can go to Coca-Cola's Instagram and I can say at Coca-Cola, like, or Twitter, I can just say at Coca-Cola, like, when's your new product coming out? And they're like, oh, okay, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And there's an interaction happening. So now so Web 2, so Web 1 is just me and the website. Web 2 is interacting with the brand. And Web3, which is why it's called Web3, the next iteration of the web, which is a weird way to explain it, but that's how we got here, is not only can you interact, so that's the decentralization part. So before, with the social media, you can only interact with brands on Twitter, Google, Instagram, Facebook. You know, like very limited. These are the brands that own that engagement. Web3 decentralizes it. I can open a brand, I can interact, I can also monetize off of it. Whereas before, these companies, these big mega media companies were the ones monetizing. Now I can monetize as an individual. So it breaks it apart a little bit more. And with that, we're seeing, well, the way that that can happen is through blockchain, NFTs, crypto, all these different metaverse, like these different elements of it are what allows it to be different than the phase before it, Web 2.
Yeah. So I know what I am. Yeah, I know what I am kind of excited about, but like, what are you most excited to see innovation wise? Like, what's at our fingertips versus what's kind of much farther off?
So there are probably a lot of different ways to answer this. But the thing that I was noticing, so before Web3 explosion, January 21, 2020, end of 19, I was starting to realize that social media felt very messy. And there was no, like, people were taking other people's posts and reworking them, like memes, for example, and like not crediting back to the artist. It was just like very messy. There was no way to trace it, anything. 100%. And so I've always been very interested in intellectual property law because I have a media background. And I was like, something is going to happen. And I don't know what it is, but it's too messy for this not to happen. So I'm going to get an IP law degree so I understand the foundations of what's allowed, so my work with emerging technology can push up against it and past it. So I had this intuition. I do this degree, I finish it, and then it was like, boom, NFT explosion. And NFTs have had a weird journey the last 2 years. But what's interesting about them is that, and I feel very strongly that every brand does not need to be doing an NFT collection and drop. And I have very strong opinions about that, but that's for another time. But I think what's valuable about NFTs and what we saw and why it had to start with art is because art is an asset that is high end. People understand. People understand there is an artist and there's a consumer, and I can buy your painting and then I can sell it. And the artist never sees where it goes after that first interaction. So I can sell it 5 times over. What the technology now allows us through NFTs, for example, and like the embedded smart contracts, is it can track it. And it can also have the contract built in where some percentage royalty goes back to the artist, or maybe you sell it 3 times, it goes back to the first owner. Like, it's this trail happening where even though you're selling and it's moving and the value is changing, everyone who's touched it is now a part of the lineage of this piece of art. So I think that's really interesting. And I think it had to start with art. But what I'm excited about, to answer your question, is how that concept can now move into audio and music and film and all these other things that have creators. But it had to start with art, and I knew it. And as it was happening, I was like, this is how people will understand it. But I'm really excited to see what happens down the line. And so we're seeing with like music and audio and movies even, that there's now this like embedded royalty structure being created, which is very exciting.
My brain is popping off right now because there are so many applications. To go back to the art piece, it makes so much sense because the art world was actually doing some things like this, right? To guarantee the authenticity. Like this is a real Matisse, right? But also artists were, when they would do limited prints, at the bottom, 1 out of 50, 2 out of 50, 3 out of 50. So there was like a certificate of authenticity in the art world. And that's kind of what the blockchain and NFTs can do for physical items as well as digital items. And so what Rebecca is saying about, seeing memes being reused everywhere, and I know I'm guilty of this without like, tagging the original photographer or tagging the original artist, the blockchain can help us kind of the artist can see where all of their stuff, where any copies or their original items have gone. Two applications where I've seen this in early stage startups. One is Kid Labs that I worked with during Techstars, KYD. That whole explosion with like Taylor Swift and Ticketmaster and so many tickets getting sold to resellers, which like Ticketmaster will make a profit off the resale of tickets with these resellers, but Taylor Swift doesn't, right? So the idea with Kid Labs is that you release your tickets, and any time that the ticket gets resold, there's clear ownership of who that ticket, the person it belongs to, but the artist can also take a percentage and be directly connected to their audience. Because right now, Taylor Swift doesn't get insights into who's coming to her concerts, right? Ticketmaster owns all of that. And Ticketmaster can make as much money as they want off of reselling. I mean, they are now the reselling platform. So that's an exciting application. Now, there's another startup I came across called Baton, who's in the upcoming accelerator for Techstars Music, who's doing that with music samples, because artists will like put out a call for other musicians to send in samples, and it's really hard to track which sample belonged to which. Open up a finder window on your computer and see everyone uses different naming conventions. So Baton is attempting to help make that connection so that if a really big artist can collect a bunch of music, it's on the blockchain, anything they end up using, the actual other musicians get credit. Think that is also a really, really cool application for kind of ownership over.
I love
media.
that. And I think that there are so many things being developed across different industries that are just organizing everything a little bit better, and to me, that's all part of this, for lack of a better word, Web3 world that's happening, Web3 emerging tech, because we're now thinking about things in different ways. We're applying technology that allows, creators to get paid when they offer. I mean, it's like a really interesting time. If you think about it, this creator economy could only really exist because people were like, we need to decentralize this structured environment. So again, it's kind of like whether it stays over here super decentralized, and like there'll probably always be people who are going deep in that. I think we're really seeing this middle section getting full of like innovators who are just now empowered through the technology to think about things differently. Which is exciting.
The cool thing about both Kid Labs and Baton, the startups I mentioned, they don't reveal the blockchain to the customer. Like the customer buying tickets to the concert doesn't need to know that this is an NFT on the blockchain, right? But it's the technology that enables a deeper connection between artists and fans, and disintermediates some of these really big companies,
And this is what
like
excites me about it across different industries is like what's possible. You know, it's to me, it's like I there was a point last year where it was like giant eye roll, where everything was so NFT, Web3, blah, blah, you know, like almost comically. And
right.
that part, I was like, people are like, oh, you're really into Web3. I'm like, I'm really excited about what's possible through the technology that is now available. I like thinking through what's possible. I like taking like these more legacy brands and like helping them rethink it and adapt and evolve and move into the next phase. I don't think everyone needs to be doing an NFT collection. I think that ship has passed. People don't really think that
The
anymore.
novelty of that, like, I don't need to. Someone owns the NFT for a Tom Brady Super Bowl football, but like Tom Brady still has that physical Super Bowl football. Just someone owns the digital rights to it, which it's all.
With the value.
Are you going to tell me it's not as novel and strange as I think it is?
Well, I will say this. I think you know, it's kind of the whole saying like nothing is new, like whatever, everything that's now was once before, or whatever the saying is. But, you know, the idea of an NFT having value is around its utility. So like, does this give you, is it a collectible that like unlocks the door into a community that does X a number of events or whatever, or you have access to Tom Brady on a one-on-one. Like it's really about all these other pieces that you get through owning this thing over here. It's a collectible in that sense. But what we saw that happened, which was very unfortunate, I think, was people saw Beeple early on who made a ton of money early on. And artists were like, oh, well, if I build it, then they'll come, they'll buy it. And it wasn't just artists, it wasn't just independent artists, graphic designers, you know, it was also brands. And a lot of brands flopped doing NFT collections because they, even though they had consultants and whatever, I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but they didn't think through the value and they didn't think through the audience. So this is like any marketing 101. Who's your audience? So it's not just if you put it up there, someone will buy it. Like you need to have some kind of rapport. You have to create something of value. None of that is ever different than any product development that's ever
like, do people actually want to do this, spend time doing this, pay money to do this? Is there a real value, you know, to it? You know, and that kind of is what let's make it all make sense, right? So if we're talking about whether, you know, AI will take over, not so soon, but people knowing how to use AI, knowing how to prompt it, knowing when to leverage it. We talked about that with ChatGPT. That's really the thing that's going to, you know, make the difference. There's fundamental social things, i.e., like knowing the people, knowing the customer, knowing what they're willing to do, that is applicable. Technology changes with time. Human goals and needs don't as much, right? So I think that's how we can make sense of artificial intelligence, the blockchain, the NFTs, right? What's going to win this year and the years to come, and I hope you agree with me, is stuff that practically has practical and pragmatic value. Like the onrush of kind of look at all the cool things, it's shiny and new, maybe is hopefully a wave that's ebbing back into the ocean.
Yeah, I mean, I think with AI, if you know, I have a friend who runs creative and content, and it's like using AI cuts her hours down,
right?
Because all of a sudden it like opens up all of these hours, and it's a weird feeling. Like you almost feel guilty, like you're somehow like cheating or something. It's like, no,
but there were all accelerators
available. Yeah. And that's really exciting. Like what happens if we can open up this time. Now, where I'm a little bit concerned is I had once heard that the personal computer was developed so a 5-day work week could be a 4-day work week and we could have a 3-day weekend. What ended up obviously happening was we were like, more work. We can do more in less time. So we can do more and more and more. And now we work all the time because it's always available. So, I think
Right.
as humanity, we need to be conscious of how we apply this technology, and it is available for us to better our lives, but we'll see.
That's yeah, so you and I could go on forever. You just hit on one of the things that drives me nuts in tech, which is that we haven't had any significant economic productivity gains in the past 20 years, despite the evolution of technology. Whole other conversation. I want to thank everyone for listening to Make Sense with Me. I'm your host, Lindsay Tabus, and this is my guest, Rebecca Batterman, executive producer, host, and innovation advisor. Rebecca, where can people find you online if they want to find you, or you want them to find you online?
Yeah. Well, my website is under development, which is not ideal for being on a tech show, but you can find me.
Yeah, well, we can always update the YouTube later.
Okay. LinkedIn, Instagram. I'm in the process of developing out some innovation shows and courses. So definitely follow me.
So excited
there, and you'll get the updates.
Cool. So if you want to continue to be the smartest person in the room, hit that subscribe for next week's episode. I'm in the early days of this, and every subscriber on YouTube makes a huge difference. And as always, you can check out all the links and resources in the show notes. That's all for this episode. Catch up with you next time. And thank you, Rebecca, for joining me.
Thank you. This was so fun. We really could do this for 5 hours straight. There's so much to talk about.
Exactly.